Please tell us your names, what your backgrounds are, and what you've been doing for the last 20 years.
My name is Ayesha Sherzai. I'm a neurologist and a scientist, and along with my husband, Dean, I'm the co-director of the Brain Health and Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma University Health. I trained at Columbia University in vascular neurology, which is treatment and prevention of stroke. And my research and my interest is in preventive neurology, which is prevention of neurological diseases such as Alzheimer's disease and stroke, especially when it comes to lifestyle.
My name is Dean Sherzai. I'm Ayesha's husband first. I'm a neurologist, I'm a neuroscientist, and I'm co-director of Alzheimer's Prevention Program at Loma University. My research is, again, same thing, prevention of neurological diseases. We've been working at this for many, many years. And my special focus and my fellowship training is in dementia and Alzheimer's.
Tell me what your book is about, The Alzheimer's Solution, a breakthrough program to prevent and reverse the symptoms of cognitive decline at every age.
The book is a book of hope and a book of science. It has to be both. So we're not just throwing hope without any true scientific backing. This came out of years of work we did at Loma University, which is the only blue zone in America. We chose to go there to study the population and then also do research outside to figure out the effect of lifestyle on specifically dementia, this devastating tsunami that's overtaking our healthcare system and will actually, in 20 years, collapse the healthcare system. How do we avoid it? And what we have found is that lifestyle, specifically a whole food plant-based lifestyle, plus other things, can significantly reduce your risk of developing dementia in general and Alzheimer's in particular. So we thought that this was extremely important to come out. It's a book of hope. And in this book, we're not selling any vitamin concoctions or anything. It's a much more comprehensive, real-life approach to prevention.
In today's society, is Alzheimer's disease considered an epidemic?
I think there's rarely any family that hasn't come across Alzheimer's or dementia.
And that's going to increase much more in the next 20 years. Yeah. In fact, it's the fastest growing epidemic in America. Whereas in the last 15 years, we are surviving diabetes better. Although the prevalence is increasing, we're surviving heart disease and everything. Mortality from Alzheimer's has gone up by 123%. And that curve is actually increasing faster. So we have to do something about it, and the cure is not going to be in a pill. It's too complex of a disease. It's going to be in communities approaching this from a lifestyle perspective.
What is your background and day-to-day job, and what made you decide to focus on Alzheimer's?
So we decided to go into this field of neurology, both of us, because we're fascinated by the brain. The brain is an incredible organ, but also because we have personally seen loved ones go through Alzheimer's. Dean had two grandparents, and I had two grandparents, both from mother and father side, who went through Alzheimer's disease, and we saw how these incredible human beings lost parts of themselves slowly and gradually to the point where they couldn't recognize their children or their grandchildren. And I saw the pain that my families went through. And it was fascinating to see such intelligent, incredibly amazing human beings, lose islands of consciousness. And that brought us into the field to understand the brain better. And when we went into this field as trainees, as residents, and as fellows, I think I'm going to speak for both of us, the field is so grim and hopeless that you get dissatisfied. You basically see people coming in with disease, usually at end stage, and there's really no medication for it. There's no hope for it. And I recall during my residency and fellowship with brochures of nursing homes or end-of-life care on our tables ready to hand out to people when they would come in with dementias and Alzheimer's disease. But then throughout our residencies and fellowships, we started reading about successful cognitive aging and about places where people have the least incidence and prevalence of diseases of the brain. And that intrigued us, and we started learning more about it and reading more about it. That's how we came across Dr. T. Colin Campbell's work from the China study, Dr. Esselstyn's work, and then read articles by Dan Buettner, who's a good friend now, about the concept of blue zones. And we found out that Loma Linda University was in Southern California, and we just jumped on that opportunity. I even remember days when we wanted to go to lifestyle, to study lifestyle better and how that relates to neurological diseases. And I remember our mentors telling us, I don't think you're going to do very well in that field. I don't think your grant is ever going to get accepted because it's a very vague field. But I'm so glad we made that decision, because I think that is the only hope. That is the only solution. Lifestyle is the only solution for Alzheimer's disease, and we've been studying it for the past decade, and we've seen it over and over again in our clinic, in our hospital work, of how wonderful the results are of instituting a healthy lifestyle early on.
We saw the negative approach to disease in really well-known institutions, UCSD, NIH. I worked at experimental therapeutics branch of NIH, doing all kind of molecular stuff, and study after study. Clinical trial after clinical trial was a failure, over and over again. And it was almost as if people just kept doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different result. We've heard that. We needed to go a different direction. We wanted to find out, were there models of lifestyle affecting other diseases? Heart disease, cancer. And that's where we found out about Loma Linda. We said the part that has not been studied so far was the brain. So for the last 15 years, we've been studying the brain in communities where they've had successful aging. And now we lead a campaign in beach cities where the whole three communities are instituting this lifestyle perspective. Yeah. For us, it's a privilege. I mean, in life, you want to do something that is of meaning. And often it's challenging because it's often outside of the norm. It's often outside of what people are used to. And in medicine is a very old system, very patriarchal system in many ways. So if you're doing things that are outside of the norm, you're pretty much chastised. Grants are not given, money is not supplied. But we took that risk, and it's paying off, because what we saw was that lifestyle actually prevented dementia. And I'll tell you, there is nothing bigger in healthcare than that right now.
Is sleep a factor in the prevention of Alzheimer's, and how about exercise as well?
I think when it comes to sleep, there's nothing more important for cleansing of the brain than that. It sounds funny, but sleep is probably the most important time of the day. I know we're knocked out and we're unconscious, but two very important things happen when we're asleep. The first thing that happens is our memories get consolidated. So all the information that comes to us during the day gets placed in the metaphorical file, folder, and cabinet. And that's how we can retrieve them later without any, spending too much energy. That happens when people go through the deep stages of sleep. The second thing that happens is the brain cleanses itself. We have these cells, microglia, or the janitor cells, that get activated when we sleep. And they go and they start eating up the garbage material that is produced during the day. Remember, the brain is the most active organ in the body. It never sleeps. We sleep, but the brain never sleeps. So imagine the amount of garbage and the byproducts that are produced. So the janitor cells get rid of them. But when people are sleep deprived, or if they have a broken pattern of sleep, these cells go nuts. They go haywire. They start eating at the healthy parts of the brain. And that's why chronic sleep deprivation actually shrinks the brain. People have smaller brains and they have memory problems. So the way we say it in our clinic, forget about all the spas and all the detox programs. Just work on getting a good night's sleep. The best spa in your life is your bedroom. Make sure that you actually institute sleep hygiene as early as possible, because otherwise your memories are going to get affected, and it actually, causes a lot of other health issues like cardiac issues too.
Brain shrinkage. I mean, we spent thousands of dollars on all kinds of health measures. When we were in Los Angeles, people would come with all kinds of detox from every pore you can imagine. Gruesome at times. But We tell them there's only two types of detox we know of. One is water. People are not drinking enough water. The second is sleep. The ultimate detox for the brain is sleep. So if you're going to invest in any spa, any detox, make your bedroom into the ultimate spa. Noise cancellation, light cancellation, temperature regulation, making sure that you know about foods that interfere with sleep, making sure that you know about the environmental factors that interfere with sleep, and making sure that you know about the behavioral bad habits that you've developed throughout the years that will interfere with sleep. If you take care of those, you won't need the massive amounts of medication that people are using. So sleep to us is probably the most important 8 hours of the day, ironically speaking. So the brain has two major drivers. The limbic system, the emotional brain, which actually deals with the past a lot. It gets information. The past is given in different kinds of weight of emotion. And the frontal lobe that projects forward. It's not independent of each other, but they're projecting forward. So do you see the connection there? One is pulling you forward, the other is pulling you back. You're never in the present. So what sleep does is calm those systems down and actually takes it out of the formula. And what's left is the pure you. I know that we're getting a little soft, but scientifically speaking, it actually allows the brain to function as a whole, not as one part pulling forward, one part pulling back. It almost is a tearing apart of the ego of the person, and sleep does that. So part of that was consolidating a memory, into the file. The other part is just that, allowing the frontal lobe to rest, allowing the limbic system to rest. So what comes out is the totality. That's critical. Sleep is a high energy state. So people think you sleep, the brain just calms down. It's working. In fact, the most important part of its work is it has to go through those phases of sleep. And if it doesn't go through those phases of sleep, you could be out for 10 hours. Yet the brain is fatigued, overwhelmed. In fact, they found that people who sleep 9 to 10 hours, they actually are poorer in health. Why? Because they needed to sleep 9 to 10 hours because during those 9 to 10 hours, they weren't getting those deep sleep cycles. That makes sleep the most important part of your day for all the things that we said. Consolidation, ego consolidation, calming the mind down, as well as detoxification. So invest in sleep.
Does mental stimulation really make a difference in preventing Alzheimer's?
Oh, you answered that.
Yes.
That's his favorite topic.
Yeah. As much as we would like to say nutrition is the most important thing, and it is. How could it not be? You're putting things that are making and breaking the brain every 4 to 5 times a day. As much as we would like to say exercise, and exercise is, and we'll talk about how important exercise is, but the most protective thing for the brain is mental activity throughout life. We call it cognitive reserve, the bank account. There's the brain reserve, which is the brain you're left with after the age of 5. Whatever happened before, the genetics, there's actually apoptosis, programmed cell death, where there's actually, you lose more cells at that time than ever afterwards. And then this infrastructure that's left is the reserve.
It's pruning of the brain.
Of the brain, yeah, cleaning up. Then after 5, whatever knowledge you've acquired, whatever challenges you've put your brain in, creates connectivity. That connectivity is protection, profound protection. Let me give you an example. When people compare the brain to a muscle, it's such a disservice to the brain. Biggest guy you know is 3 times bigger than average. Let's give the numbers on the brain. You have about 87 billion neurons. Now, they can make a couple of connections each neuron, or as many as 30,000 connections. That's no muscle. That's not even Hulk. That's a massive growth. And how do you achieve that? Mental activity throughout life. We use education as a bystander for that because it's easy to say 3 years of college, 4 years of this. But actually, the more important thing, people who have actually maintained cognitive challenge, be it running a challenging business that they loved, be it being a musician, a violinist for orchestra, be it, linguist, multiple languages, be it a writer, complex behaviors that actually challenges your brain continuously. Repetitive behavior is not that. Things that continually change. And the third factor actually, is it has to be purpose-driven. Because if it's not enjoyed, it actually does the opposite. It damages the brain. So imagine you're doing some job that you love, and it's challenging continuously because you're making it challenging. Your brain is so protected that it could withstand even the pathology of Alzheimer's. And a big study, the nun study, showed that.
Yes.
So the nun study, these nuns, several hundred of them, volunteered their writings, their body, their blood, even their brain after death to this study. So when they died, they did autopsy of their brain, and they collected their writings. And what they found was, there was a group that had lots of pathology of Alzheimer's. The brain was shrunken, lots of amyloid plaques and everything, yet during life they had no Alzheimer's. This threw everybody for a loop. But another group that had minimal pathology, the brain was pretty nice looking, not much amyloid, had profound Alzheimer's during life. What happened? So let's look in their blood, let's look at their writing, everything. When they looked at their writing, of course, nuns mostly have the same level of education, so education is out. But they looked at their writing. The ones that were protected despite the pathology had much more sophisticated language, much broader vocabulary, much more well-read, and they were much more involved in their communities. So a task that involved them in the communities, their language, actually protected them even against the pathology of Alzheimer's. That was the beginning of a complete different paradigm. So it's not just because you developed some amyloid or some vascular factor. How much have you challenged your brain? That determines the greatest amount of protection. I tell them about the taxi driver study,
Sure.
which is a very cool study.
It's related to the importance of cognitive activity for the brain. So there was a study that was done that's actually called the London Taxi Driver Study. And scientists wanted to find out what was the effect of intense cognitive activity, like memorizing a test for becoming a taxi driver in London, did to the brain. If people who have lived in London, if you've visited London, you know that the streets are nothing like in Chicago or New York. You know, there's no rules to them. It's like somebody just, glued a bunch of yarn on a paper. There's no pattern to it.
People from London are going to be very happy with you.
I love you, Londoners, but your roads are incredibly difficult to memorize. So London taxi drivers have to go through this gruesome test of memorizing the different paths, back then, of course, and they go through a test, and the percentage of people who pass is not very high. So they compared people who scored very well on this test versus those who didn't score very well, and versus people who actually didn't even take the test. And they found out that people who took the test and went through learning for this test and getting their license actually had a bigger brain after learning, and they also did very, very well as far as their memory is concerned in neuropsychological testing. And we're talking about individuals 50 years and above. So even at that stage in life, it is quite possible for one to expand their areas of memory and to get better scoring in their memory test by putting their mind through, challenges like learning, the map routes or anything for that matter.
So if I'm hearing you, it's almost never too late to start using your brain if you haven't already been regularly.
Absolutely.
Not only is it never too late, it's critical, because the connectivity happens throughout life. You don't grow many new neurons, although there's some controversy, are we growing new neurons or not? Even if we are, and there's some evidence, it's nominal. But what we are doing throughout life is connections. And that happens at 90, 100, or beyond. And it involves mental activity, challenging mental activity.
How does sitting at a computer all day affect Alzheimer's?
I think in several ways. One is if you're just sitting on a computer doing something that's stressful but not purpose-driven and it's repetitive, by itself is damaging. If you're just sitting, it's incredibly damaging. There are studies that show that people who do half an hour of aerobic exercise throughout the day, yet then go sit for 8 hours, it just negated all that benefit. In fact, the three things that we say for exercise is, one is more aerobic exercise than you thought. 25 to 30 minutes of aerobic exercise to the point where you're tired 4 to 5 days a week. The second thing is move throughout the day. Don't just, you've done the exercise, then you sit for 8 hours. Every hour, get up, stretch, walk, do that kind of stuff. And third is leg strength. If you're going to do any weight training exercises, and if you have no time for any other exercises, leg strength. Because leg strength seems to be associated with brain strength. So, but all of it comes back to legs. Stand up, move. Don't just sit in front of the computer for hours at a time. It actually has significant long-term harm.
Is there a correlation with the legs and the brain because of the circulation?
That's one factor, yes. So the biggest pumps in our body are our legs. It's not even the heart. We have the biggest muscles in our legs. And when we exercise them, certain growth hormones like BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and others are secreted. And these growth factors are responsible for the connections that Dean was talking about earlier, for making connections between neurons, brain cells, and giving brain that resilience it needs later in life. So it's incredibly important for the legs to be stronger. And we tell people, if you had to choose an exercise for brain health, focus on your legs. Focus on making your legs really, really strong.
Does sunlight help prevent Alzheimer's from all the vitamin D?
It's ironic that we work in California and we check all kinds of vitamins, and about 10% of our patients have vitamin D deficiency. So because people don't go out anymore, or they put too much sunscreen, and they should put sunscreen, but sometimes too much, and we're not getting, but it's mostly because people don't leave home as much, especially elderly. Vitamin D deficiencies is one of the things that we're seeing associated with many neurological diseases. MS is one of them, multiple sclerosis. Dementia is potentially one of them. It's at very beginning stages, so we can't expand on it too much. But there seems to be an association. And whenever we see vitamin D deficiency, we definitely tell the patients to supplement and also go out more and get more sun because it's good for you.
And regardless of the vitamin D deficiency association with sunlight in itself, especially being exposed to sunlight earlier during the day, sets your circadian rhythm. People actually tend to sleep much better later during the day if they get exposed to the sun first thing in the morning. One of the best things we can do for our brain health is a brisk walk in the morning. That way you get exposed to the sun, so the sun activates the circadian rhythm. You get melatonin secretion that will actually make you sleepy during the night. And also, starting your day with a great exercise, start your circulation. I think it's one of the best things that one can do to stave off diseases like Alzheimer's disease.
Why are Alzheimer's rates increasing?
There are several reasons. One is the aging of the population. The fastest growing population in America are those 85 and above. 4 times faster than 65 and above, who are twice as fast as everybody else. They're growing. In fact, right now we have 80,000 centenarians in the United States. That number is expected to go to 600,000 by 2050 if we don't have any other cures. And we know we will, so there's going to be much bigger. So aging. Now, does that mean that if you age, you're expected to have dementia? At this point, yes. Without the lifestyle interventions that we're not instituting, yes. At age 65, about 10% of the population is expected to have dementia. And it doubles every 10 years thereafter. And by 85, nearly 50% are expected to have dementia, and they do. And Alzheimer's being the main type. Now, is that a foregone conclusion? Absolutely not. We know that if you institute lifestyle factors, that number can be significantly lower. So it's not correlated directly with age, because at this point we're not doing anything with aging. So that aging component is a factor, and our cumulative trauma as we get older is another factor. As we get older, we don't do anything about blood pressure, at least not the underlying factors. We just keep taking medicine. We don't do anything about cholesterol, which actually becomes more and more. We just take more medicine. We don't do anything about diabetes or prediabetes, and we just give it medicine. So that's why there's cumulative damages as we get older. So all those factors have to do with the greater risk for Alzheimer's as we get older. And what can reverse all that? Earlier institution of lifestyle factors. Then it doesn't have to be an age factor.
Do we have any control over preventing Alzheimer's?
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. People get to hear the myth that Alzheimer's cannot be prevented. Alzheimer's can't be treated. That's for sure. We don't have any treatment for Alzheimer's disease. Billions of dollars have been spent over the last few decades on focusing on the wrong model of Alzheimer's disease. We always tend to focus on the end products at the latest or the last stages. Amyloid protein, say for example, is a protein that accumulates in the brain during the later stages. But that's a downstream product of everything that has happened earlier on in life. Alzheimer's can be prevented. We've actually seen it in population studies. We've seen it in our own clinic in patients who come in with mild cognitive impairment, which is the earlier stage of Alzheimer's disease. And if a lifestyle intervention is instituted, we see reversal of some of the damage and doesn't let them go down that route. Absolutely can be prevented. I think the misunderstanding is because people always confuse treatment and prevention. We never have claimed that we can treat Alzheimer's disease at this stage. No, when that happens, the brain has already gone through the stages of its damage, and it can't be. But reversal, but when it comes to prevention, absolutely, we see it all the time.
What are the most important things we can do to prevent Alzheimer's, and what proof is there that they really prevent it?
I think the most important thing we can do, because it's a personalized disease. It's not a one-path disease. Some people come to it from inflammation. Some people come to it from glucose dysregulation. Some people come to it from fats and lipid dysregulation. It's multiple directions. It's personalizing it, finding out what are your risk factors and affecting those. That's why it's good to get the testing. It's a common, do you have insulin resistance or diabetes? Do you have cholesterol? Do you have high blood pressure? Do you have risks for those things? Do you have, have you had head trauma? Other kind of factors that have put you in that path. And if so, then do the things necessary to reverse those risks. And ironically, what are the things you can do to reverse those risks? Nutrition, exercise, stress management, sleep, and mental activity. That's why our acronym is NEURO, N-E-U-R-O. Nutrition, exercise, unwind for stress management, are for restorative sleep, not just sleep. You can knock people out, but they might not be getting restorative sleep. And O is for optimizing mental activity. And if you do those things, absolutely you will reverse it. And each person has to decide where they're picking their battle first. If somebody has sleep apnea, which means that they're not getting enough oxygen at night, for them, they could eat a truck full of kale and it's not going to do any good. They should start their battle with sleep apnea. For others who are not getting any mental activity and social activity, they could be eating all the healthy food and exercising, but no social and mental activity. That's going to damage them. For others, they have the social activity, but eating extremely poorly. Then that's the battle they should take. But everybody can take on this battle in their own way. And it's not that hard. And you don't have to buy anything from anybody because it's your personal lifestyle.
And the concept of brain health is similar for all the other organs in the body. What we say is if you start taking care of your brain, you've taken care of the rest of the body. The same concepts of a whole food plant-based diet being good for the heart actually applies to the brain as well. Prevention,
maybe even more.
Maybe even more, absolutely, because it's a very, very vascular organ. We actually have more arteries in our brain than any other organ in the body. So how can it not be affected by lifestyle? And as far as data is concerned and research is concerned, I don't think there's any controversy. We've known for decades and decades of what works for the brain and for the body. It's about getting rid of processed foods. It's about getting rid of saturated fats from meats and poultry and dairy products. It's about increasing a whole food plant-based diet as far as nutrition is concerned. And then the same thing for exercise, for stress management, for sleep. Let me tell you about sleep. Sleep apnea, which is an epidemic, increases your chances of Alzheimer's disease by 70%. 70%. So, like Dean said, it's a personalized approach. If you have sleep apnea and you refuse to wear your CPAP machine because it's very uncomfortable, no matter how much you exercise, no matter how much you eat healthy foods, if you don't take care of that, that's not going to be helpful for your brain at all. So it has to be through a personalized approach.
Are there any scientific studies showing anything that clearly prevents Alzheimer's and dementia?
There are many studies that have shown that lifestyle affects prevalence and proclivity for Alzheimer's. There are no drug studies, none, that have shown that they've actually even slowed down the disease. None.
As far as data for nutrition is concerned, there's plenty of data to show that, a diet that is predominantly plant-based reduces the risk of Alzheimer's disease significantly. One of the studies that came out a couple of years ago from Rush University showed that adherence to a MIND diet. A MIND diet is a hybrid of a Mediterranean diet and a diet low in sodium, the DASH diet. But when you look at the scoring system, it's high in vegetables, fruits, beans, whole grains, nuts and seeds, and low in animal products and animal saturated fats and processed foods, obviously. By adhering to that diet, people were able to reduce their risk for Alzheimer's disease by 53%. 53%. What medication does that? We don't have any. And even moderate adherence to that diet actually reduced the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 35%. That was just diet alone, not even including exercise or mental stimulation or anything of that nature. The data goes on. Back in 1993, Dr. Paul Guillaume from Loma University was interested to see the incidence and prevalence of Alzheimer's disease in the Adventist community. Now, Adventists are half vegetarian, half non-vegetarian, so he wanted to see what was the effect of diet on the development of Alzheimer's. And he found out that people who were non-vegetarians, who were omnivores, actually had twice the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And these were individuals who consumed meats and poultry, including fish as well, while vegetarians had lower incidence. The same thing in Kaiser Permanente in Northern California study. About 10,000 individuals followed for many years. They found out that when people have high cholesterol during their midlife, their chances of Alzheimer's disease increased by 57%. And even if they had moderately high cholesterol levels during midlife, their chances increased by 23%. And the same thing goes in Columbia University. They found out that in the Northern Manhattan study, people who consumed a plant-based diet significantly reduced their chances of memory decline. So you see these studies for nutrition. Let's take exercise, for example. There was a study, a meta-analysis study, which looks at data from multiple studies put together. Thousands of individuals, followed many, many years. They found out that moderate to strenuous activity, something that makes you break a sweat and have a difficult time finishing a sentence, reduced the risk of Alzheimer's disease by 38%. Now, these numbers are incredible. For diet, look at that, 53%. For exercise, 38%. You put those together and you do that in life. Obviously, the numbers don't add up. It ends up being more than 100%, but that's statistics. It doesn't work that way. But these are incredibly strong evidence that shows us that if you live a certain lifestyle, you're bound to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's disease. We also know a lot about stress and how stress affects the brain. There have been multiple studies done on what actually happens when people are stressed out. And when we talk about stress, it's the daily worries, the little worries that kind of just eat at you. And that causes the release of chemicals and hormones in our bodies like cortisol and adrenaline that literally shrink the brain. And it doesn't allow you to consolidate memory. It doesn't allow the brain to grow and thrive. It actually stops from the formation of long-term memory from all the information that you get on a daily basis. Same thing in optimization of cognitive activity. Dean and his colleagues actually published a paper and they looked at brain games and cognitive activity and how it reduces the risk of cognitive impairment. And they found out that when people focus on their weaknesses, say for example, not being able to focus on something or not being able to remember short-term items, their recall is affected. If they practice towards making those better, you actually reverse that damage in your brain and you get a better brain. So there's no shortage of data. There's a lot of data that we can prevent Alzheimer's disease.
What do you think of the likelihood of a drug becoming available that could stop or reverse the progression of Alzheimer's or dementia?
We don't think that there will be a drug that will actually reverse the disease. Reverse means that the damage that's been done is actually then corrected. There might be a drug that slows down the progression, and there might be a combination of drugs that actually stop the progression altogether. But reversing implies that at the same time that it stopped that, it helped regrow the brain. That's not going to happen. Because by the time that Alzheimer's has manifested, significant damage will have been done. We're talking about amyloid accumulation, vascular disease, neuronal loss. So let's say that you find a drug that stops that. Will it also at the same time help regrowth? No. But that in itself is actually profound. If and when they do this, where they, in a combination drug, and I don't think it's going to be one drug, they're able to stop the disease from progressing. That's profound in itself, because then you can give lifestyle the chance to regrow the brain, or at least the connections of the brain. So I think there's hope. It's not in the near horizon, but there will be definitely something in the near future, And in the meantime, what we have to do is institute lifestyle changes. Because even when there's stoppage of the disease, let's say in 5 to 10 years, you still need lifestyle to regrow. So why not institute it now?
I think it's important for people to understand that Alzheimer's is not one disease. There are multiple pathways to Alzheimer's disease. And unfortunately at NIH and other research institutes, the focus has been on a particular protein or a particular molecule, and that's not what happens. It's a very complex disease, and the way to approach its prevention also has to be multifaceted and complex. And right now, prevention is the only treatment.
What do you think of the likelihood that we'll discover a natural remedy or lifestyle choice being able to stop or reverse the progression of Alzheimer's or dementia?
I would say 100%. And I would say we have it now. And that's lifestyle intervention through a whole food, plant-based diet, exercise, stress management, good sleep hygiene, and mental activity. 100%. We have it now. We just have to accept it at a population level. Why is this not being promulgated and spread? Because there's no money to be made. Nothing to be sold. Nothing to be bought. And it's not a controversy. It's not a conspiracy. It's just that even us as patients, as consumers, we love that one pill, one vitamin, one protocol, one plan. Here's the plan. Go home, buy more vegetables, less meat and sugar. Go home and exercise in your living room. Get a recumbent bike and connect it to your TV so the TV is not working unless the bike is moving. Go home and identify on a whiteboard what your good stresses are. Learning a new musical instrument. What your good stresses are. Learning to lead a charitable organization. And that kind of stress actually grows the brain. And identify the bad stresses, the job repetitive that you're doing at work, reduce it and make it more varied. Sleep better. Identify your bedroom as a place as a sanctuary. Make it a spa. Sleep hygiene. And then get socially and mentally involved in the community. Learn a musical instrument. Go get a group and play cards with them. By the way, eating healthy food, a snack. Start, chatter and ripping on each other and all kinds of stuff, because that takes mental activity. That's the kind of stuff that will actually prevent brain diseases. Brain is a living machine, the kinds of which we will not see in a while. We keep hearing about AI this and AI that. The brain is 87 billion neurons, 1 quadrillion connections, 1 times 10 to the 50th power. And we're using it at 1% efficiency. When they say that we only use 10% of the brain, no. We're using 100% of the brain, but at 1% efficiency. Where repeated cycles, repeat habits, even our thoughts are habit loops. We keep rerunning the same habit loop of thought. We think we're thinking. We're running the same loop. Why? Because it's high energy to go in the cortex, in the higher brain, thinking. And brain doesn't want to spend that much energy. Well, evolutionarily. But it actually grows the brain when you go outside of the habit loop. And that is done not in a fancy spa in Arizona. It's done in your living room and your kitchen. Ironically, even with that passion, even with that data, we said this to the people, and I know that they're incredulous because we've been raised in a pill society. If it doesn't come in a pill, it can't be working. It's not science. And they will accept pseudoscience with these vitamins and blue jellyfish things and all this stuff instead of real life science, which is lifestyle science, as long as it's in a pill. We have to change that mentality. We have to change that mentality because the consequence is dire. This tsunami of Alzheimer's or dementia in general is going to take the healthcare system. Right now, it's the costliest disease of them all. $259 billion direct cost, $240 billion indirect cost, $500 billion altogether, more than. Let's put that in comparison. The second costliest disease is heart disease at $120 billion. Third costliest is all cancers at $70 billion. $500 billion, $70 billion. And that number is going to go to $3 trillion by 2040 actually, if we don't do something about it. And it's not going to be in a pill, it's going to be in our communities.
Please tell us about the paper you published on insulin resistance.
So insulin resistance is a condition where your body does not recognize the amount of glucose circulating, and it does not use glucose as a fuel for cells because of excess. Now, saturated fats have a lot to do with that. Saturated fat actually jams the doors to the cells to take in glucose, and it completely messes up the mechanism of insulin allowing glucose to go into the cells. We wanted to find out whether insulin resistance increased the chances of cognitive impairment in a large population, and we studied that in NHANES, which is a large database. And we found out that when people have insulin resistance, regardless of diagnosis of diabetes, had an increased chance of having bad memories and cognitive decline. And it makes sense. If you constantly have dysregulation of glucose in your body, and if you constantly are, consuming a lot of saturated fat, which contributes to insulin resistance, obviously your brain is going to get shocked and it will not be able to function normally. So it's very, very important for people to understand that insulin resistance contributes to cognitive decline.
Do you think it's accurate to call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes?
Well, for the last few years, we keep getting different names. Type 3 diabetes, garbage disposal disease, different names. Reality is, it's because we're not understanding that Alzheimer's is not one disease. People come to Alzheimer's from insulin resistance side, which would be a diabetic component, from lipid dysregulation, which has to do with cholesterol and ApoE4 and all of that, or from inflammation. People who have repeat traumatic brain injury have a much higher risk of dementia. So the definition depends on which pathway you've taken there. So I think that calling it type 3 diabetes is not right because it's taking just a small category of the patients. It's a combination of those. And a lot of times it's all of those things combined. Inflammation seems to be a common pathway though. Even if you come from glucose dysregulation or fat dysregulation, inflammation seems to be the pathway that ultimately moves the process forward. So it's better to look at it as Ayesha said, a more multifaceted disease and more complex disease than one pathway disease.
How does the prevalence of Alzheimer's compare today to, say, 50 years ago, and how's it trending?
Alzheimer's is increasing significantly now for several reasons. One is we're surviving more. Mm-hmm. I mean, right before Fleming and penicillin and all these, and people wouldn't live to 65. People have no idea that from 1940s till now, the world has changed significantly. Before that time, there weren't that many people that would live to 70, 80, 90. We would die from infections. Whenever we give a talk, we actually say, how many people in this room had a dental procedure in their life? How many people have used an antibiotic? How many people have had a surgery? Almost everybody ends up raising their hand. But I would say most of you would be dead before the 1940s. And so that revolution has helped people live longer. And given that Alzheimer's is not so much a disease of aging as it is a disease of cumulative trauma throughout life. So if you live longer, or if you allow trauma to accumulate throughout your life, meaning glucose and lipid and all that, then your chances go higher. That's what's happening. People are living longer, and therefore they're facing diseases that actually push the Alzheimer's forward.
As physicians and healthcare providers, we've become really good at managing disease. And you hear that word a lot in the hospitals. You manage diabetes. You manage blood pressure. You manage cholesterol. Nobody ever talks about treating it. You know why? Because the medications that we have, they don't really affect the disease process. They just manage the symptoms on the surface. It's like, you clean off the dirt and the dust from your carpet and you just kind of swipe it underneath it. But the dirt and the dust is it's there. You haven't gotten rid of it. And so it's the accumulation of all these pathologies and this damage that's continuously going on in our bodies that result in brain damage. And that's why people who have long-term diabetes on multiple medication, on blood pressure medication, on cholesterol medication, they feel fine, they function, but the pathology continues going on. And then they get Alzheimer's disease and dementia. And that's why we're actually seeing more and more of it now compared to 50 years ago.
What were the main conclusions of your book and research?
The main conclusions of the book is about hope, that the most important organ that we have, in fact, that what makes us who we are, is the brain. We can do a lot about not just preventing disease, but actually having vibrant, growing, powerful brains well into our 80s, 90s, and beyond. And it's in our control. Now, whenever we say this, people say, oh, are you actually blaming people who developed dementia and stroke for what they did? No, it's like saying somebody who had a heart attack, it's their fault. No, we identify what things actually put people at risk, how we should learn from that, how we should change for future. I mean, I lost 2 grandparents to this disease, and Ayesha lost 2 grandparents to the disease. We're not blaming anybody, but we're also identifying for the fact that lifestyle that they led contributed to some extent. And there are things that any one of us can do, not to just avoid Alzheimer's. That's just the icing on the cake, but to have vibrant, growing brains well into your later life. Because the opposite direction is also true. If you don't do the right things, exercise, mental activity, good food, your pathology starts in your 20s and 30s. We've seen the decline in your 20s and 30s. You reach a peak in your 20s, and then if you don't do the right things, there's a continual decline in your memory and processing, executive function, everything. But people actually who institute the right lifestyles, they start growing the brain at any age. That's hope. Hope based on science. There's nothing more valuable than that. So we're empowering people, and I think this is a book about empowerment.
And as healthcare providers, I think we have the privilege of being that bridge between the world of science and public health. I think Dean and I have completely dedicated ourselves to presenting the real data. And in our book, we wanted people to know that there really isn't any confusion about brain health. Yes, there's a lot of noise, there's a lot of clutter out there, but we've had the data for such a long time about prevention of brain diseases like Alzheimer's disease and stroke, and it all has to do with lifestyle.
Absolutely.